Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, and the dog days keep on rolling here in Los Angeles. Seem to be developing kind of a new weather occurrence, which is basically humidity, high humidity, which is just not, Los Angeles is basically a desert. Many of y'all know that, but high humidity is not necessarily something that happens on a regular occurrence. It's actually quite rare, but this year it happens to be actually quite prevalent. Not just when it's warm, but also when it was cooler and we were getting a lot of rains, and it has been humid the whole year. I wonder why. Could it be more water vapor in the air? My guess is that it will continue to keep on getting more humid. I want to thank those who have been contributing to the channel. I got some awesome donations over the last couple of weeks. As always, thank you so much. It really helps me continue to do this. I would like to do this a lot more, and it's just difficult, but trying to figure out a way to kind of transition into maybe just doing this on a more, on a more full part-time basis or something like that. I wouldn't even call this a part-time something, but I mean, I try to do something every day, but if I could do maybe a couple videos a day or kind of churn out something on more of a regular basis, would like to do that. Just going to get into some climate change news. Every time I do miss a day of video making, I feel like I'm super late on some news. This is from yesterday, and pretty harrowing stuff. At least 6 dead, 1,500 hospitalized as heat wave hits Japan. So they just got rocked by some floods and some more floods and some storms, and now they're getting a heat wave. A heat wave it's killed at least 6 people and hospitalized more than 1,500 others across the nation Saturday as a 3-day weekend got underway, a Kyoto news tally showed. The deaths occurred in 6 prefectures: Toyama, Shizuoka, Tottori, Hiroshima, Oita, and Hiroshima was just one of the prefectures hit by the flooding. Kumamoto, which saw temperatures between 33.5 and 37.4. Elsewhere, Kyoto, Gifu, and Mai prefectures saw the mercury top 38. Let's see. Some sites only give Celsius, so for Americans, 38 Celsius is 100 degrees. But obviously this is very warm for them. I think in the States, when people talk about it being so hot and it's like in the 90s, it just generally is. People are used to much hotter weather in the States. So when other places are sweltering in the 90s, it can kind of seem like, okay, it's not that hot. But if you never get that weather, it's hot. Osaka led the way with 156 people hospitalized for heat exhaustion, followed by 125 in Aichi, 102 in Chiba and Tokyo. In Shizuoka, a man in his 90s was found lying outside his home and was confirmed dead at a hospital. Another senior, 86, died at a hospital after collapsing near his home. In Okayama, where more than 1,000 volunteers showed up to help clean up flooded houses and remove debris caused by torrential rain and mudslides, at least 48 people were treated for heat-related maladies. Of the meteorological agency's 927 observation points nationwide, 613 logged highs of at least 30 and 161 logged temperatures over 35. The agency warned that temperatures will remain high throughout the week. And that is scary stuff going on. Japan is just getting hit. I know that China is seeing some effects from the typhoon as well, Typhoon Maria, I believe. Interestingly, at my work, I picked up somebody who had just finished visiting the volcano happening, erupting, or the lava flow near Kona this week, and so they were out there, sightseeing and kind of touristing this, eruption, and then literally, I ran into somebody, the same evening, who basically had to leave, had to move because where she lived was obliterated, was no longer there. So that's fairly amazing stuff. That has to do with climate change, but I just found it interesting. Moving on, this is, everyone is watching the Arctic very, very closely. I'm getting daily updates on what's going on. I'm going to read this article from Seymour Rocks. And at the end of this article, there is a video from Margot, Margot's Healing Corner. I linked one of her videos last week. Anyway, she goes through the last, maybe week or 10 days or so of Arctic sea ice readings from Climate Reanalyzer. And it just interesting stuff. So that's at the end of this article. So I'm not going to link that video, but I'm going to link this article, and then you all can check out that video if you so choose to. Update on the Arctic sea ice melt from 7/15. And I believe this is kind of taken from the Arctic news. Sudden and startling disappearance of Arctic sea ice. The image below shows sea surface temperatures on July 6th for the years 2014 to 2018 at a location near Svalbard, with an exponential trend added based on the data. The combination image below shows sea surface temperatures on July 6th for each of these years. So check this out. 2014, it was 30.6, or I'm sorry, minus 0.8 Celsius, or 30.6 Fahrenheit. 2015, 6.2 Celsius, or 43.2 Fahrenheit. 2016, 8.3 Celsius, or 47 Fahrenheit. 2017, 14.4 Celsius, or 57.9 Fahrenheit. 2018, 16.6 Celsius, or 61 degrees Fahrenheit. So the temperature, sea surface temperature, has doubled basically doubled in the last 5 years. That is extremely on the exponential. So there's a graph here kind of showing what's going on, where it's going to go. We're looking at, obviously at least 70 degrees in 2019, or over 70, actually, maybe up into the 80s. To provide context, a fairly average temperature for Cook Strait, New Zealand, between the North and South Islands, where I live, is 14 degrees Celsius, or 57 degrees Fahrenheit. It is at 41 south, whereas Svalbard is at 78 north. Situation reflects the rapid decline of Arctic sea ice over the years. The animation below shows a fall in volume of some 1 meter over most of the sea ice over the period from June 21 through July 12, 2018, with a further 8 days of forecasts added. The animation illustrates the huge amount of melting taking place from underneath due to an inflow of heat from the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean and from warm water from rivers that end in the Arctic Ocean. Meanwhile, sea ice extent doesn't fall very much at all. When only looking at sea ice extent, the dramatic fall in sea ice volume may be overlooked. Most commentators talk about sea ice extent, which is surface ice affected more directly by the weather. Complete disappearance of Arctic sea ice in September of 2018 is within the margins of a trend based on yearly annual minimum volume, as illustrated in the image below. So, yeah, it is possible. Meanwhile, here's the sea ice concentration for today. Much of the Arctic is getting down to 40% ice concentration. There is very little ice left at 100% concentration. This has all happened in the course of a few short weeks. Sometimes it is good to hear from a non-specialist. Here is an update report from Margot, who's following this very closely. And again, that's the video I was talking about earlier. So check that out. Also, the Arctic Sea Ice Group on Facebook has quite a few updates daily. Moving on. I believe I grabbed this article off of Facebook. It's from July 13th. The U.S. is burning up, but no one wants to talk about the elephant in the room. It's too hot, too hot. And climate scientists agree that it's only going to get hotter. Yet, despite the record-breaking heat wave impacting millions of Americans right now, barely anyone in the mainstream media is talking about the elephant in the room. A new and distressing report from Media Matters reveals that most major broadcast TV networks are completely ignoring the link between unprecedented heat waves and climate change. In the last week of June, the U.S. was hit by a massive and powerful heat wave stretching right across the country. The dangerous temperatures are like nothing ever seen before, breaking 227 U.S. records in the first week alone. It would be nice to think that reporters would want to, no, have to, explain to the public why these dangerous and deadly temperatures are becoming more common and more intense. Media Matters' recent analysis puts that hopeful assumption to rest. The report analyzed 2 weeks of TV segments on ABC, CBS, and NBC. Out of all 127 segments featuring the U.S. heat wave, only one bothered to mention climate change. The thing is, no matter how many reporters fail to make this connection, climate scientists are positive that one exists. In fact, there is a robust and overwhelming scientific evidence to suggest that human-caused climate change is impacting both the frequency and the intensity of heat waves. The overall trend over decades to more intense and more frequent heat waves is definitely a signal of global warming. UCLA climate scientist Daniel Swain told the New York Times about California's current heat wave. Just this year, in an analysis published in Nature Climate Change, scientists concluded that by 2030, climate change, not natural variability, will be the primary cause of heat waves in both the western U.S. and the Great Lakes region. Yeah, I can only imagine what those heat waves are going to feel like in 2030. Watching the news, however, viewers would have no idea that these studies even existed. Over a 2-week period from June 27 to July 10, ABC ran 32 segments on the heat wave. In the same period, NBC ran 59. None of these segments addressed how climate change can influence extreme temperatures. In comparison, CBS managed to mention climate change in one of its segments on the heat wave, but even still, the other 35 other segments on the network failed to do the same. And we wonder why everybody is a lukewarmist, or we wonder why nobody is concerned about this. The limited and superficial coverage of basic climate science is abysmal, but it's also nothing new. TV networks have been undercovering climate change for years. A Media Matter study from last year found that over a 2-week period during hurricane season, ABC and NBC failed to run even one segment on the link between climate change and hurricanes. To be fair, there are some networks that are doing a better job. PBS NewsHour, for example, ran 2 segments on the heat wave, with one of the segments explicitly discussing climate change. Global temperatures reached extreme highs this past week, something scientists have been warning as a part of the effects of climate change, the segment noted. Still, 50% is not exactly a sweeping victory for climate coverage, and there's still plenty of room for improvement. Thankfully, the public, science advocates, and science communicators are starting to fight back. Local meteorologists, for instance, have been stepping up and using their platform to spread awareness about climate change and its influence on extreme temperatures and storms. Pressure is also coming from the public, with scientists and science advocates calling out various news networks for their substandard coverage of pressing environmental issues. The problem is so extensive that even those outlets that are considered liberal have been accused of neglecting the topic. A recent Twitter thread by author and climate activist Dr. Genevieve Gunther went viral after it called out NPR and a whole host of other news sources for underreporting climate change. Well, yeah, I happened to listen to NPR for a few hours this morning, and I heard 3 stories that are very much connected to climate change without anyone on the radio mentioning climate change even once, Gunther wrote. It was surreal and disturbing. The thread argues that because climate change is happening right now in every part of the world, all journalists have a responsibility to address it, not just those with the science or environment beat. It's no secret that climate change can be a controversial and politically loaded subject. But journalism has a responsibility to tell the whole truth, no matter how inconvenient. The new findings reveal just how extensive the media's climate silence has become. Indeed, they are doing a grave disservice to the entire population of the globe. But it seems to be especially acute in the United States. Not very acute. I happen to, let's see. I mean, even the exponential, I feel like just the last 2 years have been exponential as far as weather disasters and heat wave incidents. You know, this was going on last summer, last year, the fires, the floods, the hurricanes, the heat waves, the droughts. All of this is, you know, all of these things are increasing in rapidity of occurrence. And we are already in the exponential curve of what is going on. So, you know, the fact that they can't even connect climate change to what's going on is really ridiculous. I mean, we, you know, scientifically, you could say that in 2030, all weather will be climate change induced. But I'm just going to say unscientifically, because I'm not a scientist, I'm just a layperson, but if anybody can put together the dots, right now, everything that's happening is influenced by climate change. Absolutely everything. You know, all the heat waves, all this exponential increase in natural disasters, floods, fire, hurricanes, heat waves, all of it. It's all climate change. All of this is climate change. And it's going to get worse, and people need to know this. People need to understand what is going to be happening to them in the next couple of years, not in the next 10 years, not in the next 20 years. I watched the Robert Hallam video again last night. I didn't even finish it because it's intense. It's really intense. You know, he's really putting together the information in such a kind of brutally tight fashion that, there's just, it's hard to deal with, I mean, his presentation is almost a Guy McPherson presentation on steroids on some level. It just is so, it's just so bad. But that being said, I highly recommend watching that. It's a great video. If you are in any way confused about what is going on, please watch the Robert Hallam video. Anyone who has any questions about what's going on, please watch that video. Moving on to most likely the last article I'm going to read tonight, just because it is getting late. And this person is getting tired. Climate change will get a whole lot worse before it gets better, according to game theory. To understand why governments continually fail to take decisive action against climate change, you've got to have a strong grasp on game theory and the tragedy of the commons. I haven't read this yet, but I just thought the title was very, very interesting. So let's get into this. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better, according to new research published in Nature. I'm not sure how it can get any better, but anyways, humanity will witness marked sea level rises and frequent killer heat waves before governments take decisive action against climate change. Of course they will. And to predict the future, mathematicians have turned to game theory. Of course they have. The paper, published by a team of mathematicians, uses game theory to explain why it is so hard to protect the environment, updating it so they could model the effects of climate change over use of precious resources and pollution of pristine environments. The bad news is that the model suggests that when it comes to climate change, things might have to get demonstrably worse before they can get better. The good news, on the other hand, is that game theory could help policymakers to craft new and better incentives to help nations cooperate in international agreements. The researchers used one of the best-known social dilemmas in game theory, called the tragedy of the commons, to reach their predictions. The tragedy of the commons was first described in the 19th century by William Forster Lloyd, an Oxford University political philosopher. Lloyd analyzed the overuse of common land, also known as a common, by people who had rights to use it, to graze their sheep, for example, to air the idea that resources that do not clearly belong to an individual or a group are likely to be overexploited, since conserving them isn't in the interest of the individual. The idea was later made famous by American ecologist Garrett Hardin in a 1968 paper published in the journal Science. The tragedy of the commons has become one of the most used metaphors among experts to illustrate our chronic inability to sustain a resource that everybody is free to use, and alas, just as free to abuse. We see examples of this dilemma in our daily lives, from litter on the subway to the reluctance to empty the dishwasher in the shared student kitchen. The most extreme example, however, is the current environmental crisis. Previous attempts to come up with a mathematical model of the environmental tragedy made the unrealistic assumption that the commons remained unchanged as people exploited them. They played the same game in every round of the model. These approaches could not study the effects of a degrading environment, such as an increasingly overfished sea or a river as it was being polluted, for example. In their new Nature paper, Martin Nowak of Harvard University worked with Christine Hilby and Krishnendu Chatterjee of the Institute of Science and Technology, Austria, and Stefan Simsa of Charles University in Prague, detail a more faithful way to model and understand the dilemma with mathematics. It is based on the simple idea that our actions today change the game we can play tomorrow, Nowak says. The games in question involve encounters between people where they can either work together and cooperate or pursue their own selfish motives instead. Depending on what you and I are doing, we move to another game. So as an example, you and I write an article together, and if we do well, we may do a book. And if this continues, we might set up a research institute. When they explored the new mathematical model, the scientists found that this dependence on players' actions could greatly increase the chance that players cooperate, provided the right conditions were in place. We have shown how environmental feedback can spur cooperation, said Nowak, who has spent decades exploring the laws of cooperation. These feedback factors include how quickly our resources, be it in the ocean or the planet's ozone layer, degrade. This might explain why relatively rapid action to ban chemicals such as chlorofluorocarbons were prompted when a dramatic drop in the atmospheric ozone that protects life from the sun's harmful UV rays was detected by a British team working in Antarctica in 1985. A global agreement to protect the stratospheric ozone layer, the Montreal Protocol, was finalized in 1987 and went into force a couple of years later. This is not the case with climate change. Although we know that glaciers are shrinking, sea levels are rising, and extreme weather events, from hurricanes to heat waves, are becoming more intense. These effects are often complex and occur over longer timescales, so establishing a clear link between them and climate change is less straightforward. This, according to Nowak, might explain why it has been more difficult to come up with effective international cooperation to curb climate change driven by greenhouse gases. The new mathematical model suggests that global environment has to deteriorate in a dramatic way, hurricanes becoming more intense, more droughts and heat waves before our eyes, before governments will be spurred on to making things better. When human activity leads to drastic environmental deterioration through global warming, cooperation becomes the winning strategy, Nowak says. However, this new mathematical model also enables policymakers to explore future possibilities raised by climate models and explore next steps on a more rational basis. This opens up many new possibilities, said Nowak. Because key impacts of climate change occur over a long timescale, one option is not to rely on environmental decline to spur policymakers into action. Instead, we need to devise incentives that work over much shorter timescales, say a year or so. We even show which feedback is needed, Nowak says. You could give people, cities, or countries financial incentives to work together on a problem, and if they succeed, they get these incentives and can move to bigger and more complex problems, along with even larger rewards. The financial incentives hinge on the action of the players, whether they are people or countries. Cooperation leads to more valuable games, defection to less valuable ones, and can be designed to occur quickly enough to make a difference, Nowak says. This new approach is a game changer. I don't know if how y'all feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that, but something to think about. I encourage and respect and enjoy and like to hear, any plans, any solutions, any paths forward there. I've heard quite a few over the last, month or two. And it is encouraging that people are at least thinking about, what a different world could look like, or what the steps might be, or, beyond whether or not we have a chance. It's good to at least imagine what the path might be. I personally find the biggest challenge to be, like we can come up with all these ideas and we can come up with all the solutions and strategies, but it's the actual push, it's the actual implementation, it's the actual we know that we need to steer the ship over here, but we can't move the rudder because it's really effing hard to move that rudder. It is really hard, especially when half the crew on the ship, or most of the crew on the ship, don't even understand why we need to actually move the rudder at a 90-degree angle and go this way. So you have to actually convince the whole crew to actually do this maneuver, and then can you turn the rudder? You know, that's where we're at, is we can't even decide, like, okay, we all need to help turn this rudder. That's the predicament that we're in. So, you know, along with the plans and along with the strategies, and we do need to keep thinking about the plans and the strategies. At least this is, you know, maybe this game theory thing is some kind of entry into, you know, we need to figure out what the psychology, what the, you know, what's the actual motivation to get everybody on board. Or do we just wait until it gets so bad that everybody's like, oh my God, and it's too late. Hopefully, I mean, and I do hope, hopefully that's not what ends up happening, although that looks like the likely course at the moment. Because all the worst case scenarios are based on the business as usual model, and we are definitely business as usual, and we are accelerating business as usual. And maybe that's the way to convince people that, the way to maybe get people to imagine something else is just say, like, business as usual isn't what we want to do. So start imagining another way to live. Just put yourself in another reality, put yourself in another world, put yourself in another mind frame. This is not how we're going to be living very soon. Like it or not, try or not, intentional or not, this is not how we're going to be living very soon. So maybe imagine something better instead of, worst case scenario. Just a thought. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you do want to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. I hope to be back tomorrow with another video. Until next time, peace.